Welcome to the podcast today. It's Tuesday, July 20th. And that means around here on the Common Good podcast, we're going to talk a little politics. So get your fun hat on and tighten up those earbuds and get ready for a ride. Doug Pagitt here out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, sitting down today. And somewhere outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas is Robb Ryerse with a fine hat on.
Yeah,
as well.
So if you're actually in Fayetteville, Arkansas, again.
You say so. Yeah, you say so.
Yeah, I say so. Yeah, and I'd like to amend my location to be in Robb Ryerse, coming from Delta variant hotspot.
Yeah,
because we are leading the nation with Delta variants. We've got 10,000 active cases here in Arkansas right now, and hospitals are overflowing, and we are seeing more new cases each day than we did during the height of the initial wave of the pandemic that caused everything to be shut down. It's fun being here in Arkansas, where the majority of people are not vaccinated, and they're not wearing masks. They're not social distancing. They're just living life,
taking it raw. They're just gonna ride raw there in Arkansas. Yep. Hey, isn't there a famous national park there in Arkansas? Hot Springs National Park.
Yes,
Arkansas?
Yes, there is.
It could also now be known as Hotspot, Arkansas. Not just Hot Springs. It could be. So we should start a little town called Hotspot, Arkansas. Yeah, well, apparently all over the country, every state has rising cases, and it's going to remain. And this was talked about. The people, the public health people were like, "Here's what's going to happen in the summer when it gets hot and people go inside." Like, same thing happened last year, right? That in Florida and in Arkansas, other places where it gets very hot, and people then move into air conditioning, where the air is not recycled in the same way in hot weather. That's one of the reasons they believe that the variants or that the vaccine, that the virus is spreading. This one's more contagious, this particular variant. So sorry for you there in Arkansas. Maybe, maybe people will change their minds, start getting the vaccine. What do you think, Robb?
I think that we need to incentivize the vaccine in more effective ways than we have in the past.
Like not getting sick is not enough.
It's not enough. Okay. Whatever it's going to take, really. Ohio had entered people into a drawing, and they were giving away $1 million to 5 different people. Here in Arkansas, you got your choice between a lottery ticket. Ooh. Or a free registration with the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, so you didn't have to pay for your hunting or fishing license. Of course, that happened after I was vaccinated, so I didn't get either of those goodies. I think we should just start sending $1,000 checks every month to everyone who's vaccinated. If you're vaccinated, you get
the other
a
way. Grant. Do a stimulus, and vaccinated people get it, and non-vaccinated people don't, because you don't want the government interfering in your shots, and you don't want the government interfering in your bank account.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Maybe that's a better incentive, right? Like, hey, if you don't get the vaccine, not only you don't get the $1,000 contribution from the federal government. Why not? I mean, they're going to spend money. We're gonna roll out and fill the pool. If you've been listening to our Friday conversations about economics, the government's going to fill the pool, and if we have to splash a little out through some taxes on the rich, we'll do so. But we're going to fill up those bank accounts. I think that sounds like a reasonable bet. Do you think that would go over if the government was just buying off people to take a privately funded and privately developed vaccine? You think that's going to go over in the annals of American history?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's completely accurate to say privately funded and privately developed vaccine.
Really?
I think those companies got a lot of money from the federal government through pre-purchased
Sure, sure.
vaccines to give
Yes.
them the
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. I mean, they were
Um,
guaranteed that they were going to make a
mhm,
sale,
yep.
like the guy selling T-shirts at the high school basketball
Yeah.
tournament. They're
Yeah.
sure they're going to make the sales. Yeah. But
Yeah.
Pfizer was just making a really big deal out of the fact that, like, hey, Trump administration, you didn't pay for this, you didn't do any of this, you get nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
But
I- you know,
this
go ahead.
Delta variant is tremendously serious, and my the big fear is that we're in this position where pandemic fatigue has set in so greatly.
Yes.
It had, and then we kind of, pretended like the pandemic was over, and we've
Yes.
gotten used to that, and we're not going back. And
Nope.
if a whole bunch of people get sick, oh well,
Yep.
like that.
You had your yep.
Yeah, it is really, really discouraging to see. Um, that people aren't taking this Delta variant seriously, and B, that so many people are refusing to get the vaccine,
Yep.
either because they've got political, theological, medicinal reasons not to
Yeah.
get it, or they're just too busy, they just aren't interested, whatever it is. Like, it is so discouraging to see so many people who aren't getting the vaccine, and this Delta variant, I think, is something that we need to take really, really seriously.
I hear you. And I think we've concluded now in this country that there's only a percentage, and it's probably 60%
Yeah.
of the adult population who are going to go along with any kind of a vaccine. And we can maybe bump that thing up to 65, 67% with a certain kind of agitation and reward system. We just have to know going into our next public health crisis, that's where the number is. We've never
Yeah.
had to test this before. It was speculation if people would do it or not. I think we have our answer, at
Yeah.
least in this set of conditions, right? And Jim Eaton puts a great point in that there in LA is a friend who's 23 years old and is very sick with the Delta virus. But most people, even with 600,000 people dying of or with COVID, most people still who don't get aren't getting the vaccine are like, I don't know anybody who even has this thing. Like, it's just not really
Yeah.
coming close to me. I don't think it's that urgent. That's what I hear from a lot of my friends who are not getting the vaccine is it's not that big a deal, and I'm unwilling to risk this thing. So if it's a pandemic of this style, I think this is our number. And at some point we've moved now from like, are we going to overwhelm our health system, to this is really bad that more people are going to get sick and some innocent people who can't get the vaccine are going to be more susceptible. But we've moved now outside of I think, at least what I've been hearing, is very few people are talking about the health system collapsing the way that people were talking about a year and a half ago. So I
Well,
think we're
no,
past the
I think
Rubicon.
that I think that depends on where you live. Because here in Arkansas, uh, on a nightly basis, we are being treated to interviews with ER doctors, with
Mhm.
hospital doctors, who, the medical system in places where the Delta variant is on the rise, is greatly strained. And there's reopening COVID wards that have been closed, like that. All that stuff that was happening a year ago is happening again in certain places in the country. And it's just a matter of, like, how much this spreads. Are we going to see the exact same thing,
Yeah, I
history
hear you.
repeating itself?
I hear you, but I think we never got to the point where the health system collapsed, even in
Right.
2020. The fear was, if things continue as they are for another 3 or 4 weeks, especially in some places like New York City and
Yeah.
Detroit and some other places, it was going to collapse. There weren't enough ventilators. There wasn't enough PPP. Like, all of that was the big fear. That's what I'm saying is no longer the fear.
Right. Yeah.
Now, yes,
Now
will
the
wards
fear
get
is that,
over full? Will they have to take over other places? Will there be strain on the system? Will other doctors and nurses have to come in? Yes, all that really bad stuff. but not at the same level of like a governor needs to step in and be like, look, we're going to run into a whole other level of health crisis. If this thing, remember back in 2020, how people were like, man, if this thing takes off like crazy and emergency responders, fire peoples and people in public safety start getting so sick they can't go outside, what happens if there's a fire? What happens if there's a flood? Like the system, not just the medical system, the whole society could that was the fear that caused this slam on the brakes, make sure that we bend the curve and we take care of that. That's what I'm saying. That is what's now gone. Now we're in a place where like, hey, hospitals are going to get really full and procedures are going to be put off and they're going to have to maybe take over another area of the hospital. That's really different, I think, than where we are. So I think we have to be careful not to act as if we are right now where we were in February and March of 2020.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget.
I'm not downplaying it too much, but just saying, look, we have to recognize we're not. That's not where we are.
I think the big question now is, how are we going to get rid of all of the hand sanitizer that is in the clearance section of every store that there's just so much
billions of gallons of gel. Yeah. Hey, well, we're going to talk about a couple other things here, including our interview that we did the other day with Representative Houlahan from Pennsylvania, so hang on for that, friends. I forgot to tell you that at the upstart here. It's going to be a great conversation. We love to introduce you to people who have offered themselves up to be politicians, people who are making decisions about the kinds of things we're talking about. Real people, real competent people. I'm first time meeting Representative Houlahan, and now I feel comfortable calling her Chrissy. Partly because that's her name, and feel like we chatted. And so this is really going to be a great interview. I think people are going to enjoy. But in addition to COVID, there's another variant that is spreading, and that's the Stop the Steal variant, which is a version of Trumpism that is back in the news. And yesterday, the first defendant was sentenced for his part in the insurrection, and he got 8 months in prison. Instead of the 18 months that the government was looking for. The judge gave this man from Florida 8 months. And part of his defense in wanting to have a lighter sentence, his attorney, Rob, I don't know if you heard this, but his attorney said, look, bad things are going to happen to this man if he goes to jail for a period of time. So please don't send him to jail at all. And then quoted Lincoln by saying, when Lincoln was saying malice toward none, and that bit, which was out of the Civil War, like, hey, let's not punish the South for the rebellion against the country. They quoted that, and then the judge said, this man's going to lose his job, which is a bad thing. He's going to lose his house, and get this, he's not going to be able to care for his cats.
Oh.
When you say maybe the man that brought goggles and gloves and broke into the dais and was inside the Senate chamber in the middle of an insurrection needs to be shown some sort of consideration about not having months of his liberty taken from him because he needs to care for his cats, is the kind of mockery, frankly, that so many of these defendants, even while they're being sentenced, are still, in my view, pushing forward. I think we're going to see this. There's more than 500 people have been charged, so there's going to be just hundreds of cases where people are sentenced, and you're going to continue to see this just belligerent attitude toward the government and the federal government and any kind of law enforcement that would impact them. Very often, these people beholding to some sort of militarized law enforcement narrative. Really something that this guy was wanting the judge to consider who's going to care for his cats while he tried to overthrow the government in the insurrection. Just something else, Rob. Something else.
Yeah. We cannot let insurrection fatigue set in. We cannot get over this. We have to keep talking about this.
COVID fatigue is one thing, but insurrection fatigue, we will not stand for.
No, we will not tolerate insurrection fatigue until justice is served, we cannot get over the fact that the United States Capitol was attacked and overrun by Trump supporting white Christian nationalists and
Yeah.
and who just
senators and Congress people grabbed gas masks and ran for their safety.
yeah and now we cannot forget what took place that day, and we got to keep talking about it, and thankfully, we're now going to have a commission that's going to investigate what took place on January 6th. This is not the commission that was sought for by a joint team in Congress that would be funded and would have subpoena power and all of those things, through a bill that passed the House and then was filibustered in the Senate. Even though it had strong bipartisan support, it wasn't able to overcome the really ridiculous filibuster that exists in the Senate, and so it didn't become law. So this commission is a House commission. It's a special committee set up by Nancy Pelosi. It is going to include both Republicans and Democrats. Nancy Pelosi has already said that Liz Cheney is going to be a part of the commission. Liz Cheney, who lost her position in Republican leadership for daring to suggest A, that Joe Biden won the election, and B, that Donald Trump was responsible for the insurrection. And because of that, profound disloyalty to the dear leader, she was removed from leadership. She's going to serve on the commission. Republicans are also going to nominate, I think, are going to suggest 4 people to join the commission to represent the Republicans, and Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is suggesting those, and it sounds like the ringleader of this group of Republicans that are going to be on the commission, if Nancy Pelosi allows them to be, is none other than Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan. Mm-hmm. And people might know Jim Jordan for a couple of reasons. One, he's the congressman who never wears a jacket during committee hearings. He's always got his shirt, just his shirt and tie without a jacket. Yeah,
he's getting down to business.
He's also often referred to, Jim Jordan with the abbreviation for gymnasium, because he is involved in a scandal regarding sexual assault in Ohio that he apparently was aware of and did nothing about, and so people are often
when he was a wrestling coach.
Yes, when he was a wrestling coach, and as Amy just said in the comments, he's also known because he's an ass.
He is aggressive. Yeah. He is an aggressive,
yes, and he is
hostile person.
Yeah. He has made himself known through committee hearings, and he is a strong believer, not just in Trumpism, but in like this full-on conspiracy that Donald Trump actually won the election, and even won it in a landslide.
Speaking of landslide, I listened to a book called Landslide by Michael Wolff, worth listening to. There's another book out today. It chronicles the backstory of all of this stuff that people have been talking about, these views that Jim Jordan holds and views that other people hold. It is worth the listen. I listened to it on audiobook. It's well performed and is something that will open your eyes, startle your soul, and caused me to realize that this country can go 4 years without a functional president, because we didn't have one for 4 years. It is simply stunning. The interviews that are in the book, it's not editorial like we do here on this podcast. It is editorializing only based on interviews and quotes of the major players from last July through the insurrection, and including a final interview with Donald Trump at the end of the book, who granted Michael Wolff an interview This is the same person who wrote the book called Fire and Fury. And Trump was bragging about this man, Michael Wolff, to the other people around Mar-a-Lago during the interview, and saying this is one of the great reporters ever. And he wrote Fire and Fury to say Donald Trump is incapable of being the president. And this book makes the argument that Donald Trump is so deranged, he actually believes he won the election. That's the point they make all the way through. He's hapless, he's incompetent, and deranged. And Trump grants him an interview and brags him up and has dinner with him at Mar-a-Lago. It will shock you to the deepest level of what is with that guy and what's going on, and why do all the sycophants around him continue to do the kinds of things that they do to support him. It is a great read. Another book came out today that's called I Alone Can Fix It, and this one's getting a lot of attention as well, and it tells the same story. They sat for hours with Donald Trump, Phil Rucker and Carol Leonnig did, interviewing him just recently in Mar-a-Lago. And Rob, I don't know if you heard this, but Donald Trump does these interviews with reporters out in what they call the library there, but it's really the lobby where guests kind of come through to go out to the back patio and so on. So he sits in the middle, people come by, he interrupts the interviews all the time and checks in with the guests to see if they're happy. He's the maitre d' and former president, and doing an interview with these reporters, interrupting them all the time, bringing people over, taking selfies. Then most nights, the failed president and former blogger goes to dinner with his wife, and they sit in a roped off area in the middle of the outdoor patio with all the people around them who applaud when they come in and applaud when they go out, as if it's a wedding reception. It is a level of just bizarre actions and activities that will blow your mind. So if you've got enough Donald Trump in your life and you need to leave him behind, don't listen to it. Don't read it, either of these books. If you need a little personal insight on what's going on in there to help you, and this is what it did for me, help me make sense out of what is happening, because this doesn't feel like politics that we're doing here. You just begin to put the pieces together that there was no politicking going on. It was this other kind of bizarro world of people surrounding Donald Trump, simply telling him what he needed to hear at any given point to keep his spirits and mood up. And it's a deep background from Jared Kushner and other people that are very, very close to Trump and were in all the meetings. So it is just riveting in that front. Really, really worth the listen if you're trying to get your head around the human personal story of all of the last 4 years and just how tragic it all was.
I might be reaching my fill of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it. I listen to it on these. I'm doing these long bike rides to get ready for the We the People ride. So I had 4-hour bike rides 3 days in a row, and so I just listened to it. I'm done. The whole thing, and it felt like deep release, like therapy. I wasn't feeling triggered. I was feeling like, oh my gosh. Because this country was not harmed and damaged by a brilliant genius. Right. It was harmed and damaged by hapless, really quite pathetic people all the way around, around the whole system. And it's scary in its own sense, but I think, it, to me, kind of felt like a relief of.
Can you imagine if people this cruel and this corrupt had also been competent? The damage that could have been done.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely.
And just, I fear that had a couple of things, including the virus and the mishandling of the virus not happened, that Donald Trump very well may have won that election. It's hard to know because the numbers just went bananas with all the mail-in voting on both sides and all the turn up and everything that happened. But it's hard to know. But it was awfully close even with that. Sure, there were 12 million more votes for the elected president than there was for the failed president. But in the swing states that mattered, it was 80,000 votes, a little 10,000s here and there. And that was just, like you say, because they were so hapless and so incompetent. And when you hear the human stories behind it, which you find in some of these books, it takes away some of the lore and some of the feeling that there's that this particular administration was part of the systemic problems, and made me realize this particular administration was part of the personnel problems. And sometimes we have both of those in our society, right? You have both the systemic struggles, and then you have what people actually do that causes the struggle.
Yeah.
And this one is just a night all the way through. I mean, the incompetence from top to bottom. And this book doesn't really, Landslide, the one I'm talking about now, doesn't really allow people to get off and be the heroes the way that like General Mark Milley is trying to be that way now. And some of the other books, like, we were all getting together. We would have stopped the man had he tried to, done a military coup. Well, great. So like, who gets kudos for putting together a plan to stop the president from a coup? Like, that's not something you brag about. That's doing your job. Like, that is the level to which these people. And I heard Brian Williams interviewing both this Michael Wolff in the book I was talking about a few nights ago, and then Philip Rucker and Carol Lenning on their book. And he basically asked each of them, hey, do you ever worry that people are using these interviews and these books to burnish their own reputation when they actually were part of the problem, and now they're trying to describe to you how they were the heroes? And isn't that a problem? And they're like, yeah, we worked really hard to make sure that wasn't the case. But there's a lot of that goes on. And there's a lot of people who, and you can blame the 74 million people who voted for him alone, but we're all in on this thing. I mean, this is us. This is our country. This is our thing. And we've all got our fingers in this pie, one level or the other. So
So while people are all too familiar with Donald Trump, it's likely that folks are not terribly familiar with a congresswoman from Pennsylvania named Chrissy Houlahan. We've got a lot of you like that transition. We got a lot of Congress people that are household names, or at least for those who pay attention to politics. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Katie Porter, Mitch McConnell, folks like this that basically everybody knows, unless if you're paying attention to politics, there's people that Jim Jordan, unfortunately. Chrissy Houlahan is one such congressperson that doesn't have necessarily a national profile. Not someone that folks might be tremendously familiar with. She represents a portion of southeastern Pennsylvania, in between Philadelphia and Lancaster, and the suburbs there, and really fascinating person that we had the opportunity to have a conversation with late last week, and get to know her a bit and find out about her story. And Doug, I got to tell you, the thing that impressed me more than anything is Chrissy might be the most qualified person I've ever talked to be in public office. Like, hearing her story and her credentials and her background, and knowing that she now is in Congress, it's like, sigh of relief. Yes. Not everybody is incompetent. Here is a really competent person.
Yeah, to the point, and she will run this by all of us sort of in her litany of her background. Her and her family started the brand And One, the basketball T-shirt brand. I don't know if they did other things, but my son had lots of And One product around. She also worked for the Navy, right? Was it the Navy? She's in the military somehow. She's like an engineer in the Air Force, an engineer, and then does this, and then starts a B corporation, which is a benefit corporation. By the way, she makes a little point. Moves on. We didn't have a chance to dig down on it. But if you're unfamiliar with a B Corp, here's what they're about. If you start a regular corporation and then you ask for people to invest in your corporation as investors and as a board, you then, as the people who own and run the company, have a legal responsibility to care for the investments of the people who've invested in your company. So if you sell, on the stock market for people to buy portions of the value of your company, you have it's what's called a fiduciary responsibility. And that fiduciary responsibility, in some people's minds, this is a bit debated, but the practical function is that fiduciary responsibility takes precedence over everything else.
Yep.
So if you are told by your board or by your investors that you could make more money by being mean to your employees, and you choose to be kind to your employees, you can be removed from your position by the board and by the investors for not fulfilling a fiduciary responsibility, right? So this is sort of an exaggerated version of it. But this happens a lot. So what people created, and it turns out that Representative Houlahan, before she got into office, was part of this, was created another classification of business called a B Corp or a benefit corp. What that benefit corporation allows you to do is say we can have dual, equal purposes: to make money for shareholders if we were to have shareholders, and to benefit society, to be good. And therefore, we can then make an argument as the owners or as the operators of the company that what we're doing is to bring about good, even if investors are saying you're going to cost us money by doing that, and you can't be costing us money because we invest in you and our fiduciary responsibilities. See how I talk about it? This is how I think the investors talk. They talk like this. So they're going to have this fiduciary challenge, and a B Corp then says, hey, but also we want to care for the planet. We also want to care for the we also want to care for our employees. We have some benefit that we want to put at the equal level. Now, you might think, who cares? That's nonsense. That's not a real thing. There are a lot of people who have to sell their companies if a buyout happens and they have investors, even if they don't want to sell to another company, because investors will say, you got an offer. You know, like, let's say Rob and Doug start a fantastic company, and then a tobacco company comes and wants to buy us. And they make such a great financial offer that our investors say, Doug and Rob, you have to sell because we're all going to make a lot of money. And we say, no, we don't want a tobacco company to use our company to benefit their outcomes, because we think tobacco companies are a problem. Now, you don't, but it's just an illustration. We would be forced to, because investors would say, take the money, you have to do it. But if we're a B Corp, we could say, we also have this, and it's a legal classification. It's trying to inject into capitalism benefits as much. So it was a little passing comment where she said this thing about a B Corp. It's a big deal. And I'm so glad that she's somebody who advocates.
And I think if you pay attention, she also mentions, you get the sense that when they sold and won, they were forced to sell to the highest bidder, and they weren't real happy about it. And that's what motivated her in this direction. But that's not where she ended up. That wasn't her last stop before going to Congress. She also became a high school teacher.
Yeah,
because
for Teach for America.
Come on, this woman is. I just, Jim Eaton in the comments just suggested that we have common good cigarettes, which
I know.
which is great. So anyways, I was thoroughly impressed with Chrissy Houlahan. From a policy point of view, I personally have things that, I would see differently, and have policies that I would emphasize that are different from ones that she emphasizes. But my goodness, from the perspective of, here is what seems to be a really good human being, a really qualified human being. I am so glad she's in Congress.
Yeah, it almost makes you think that you can always change the nature of your policies to become more progressive, or to become more conservative, or become more common good or something, right? You can always adjust those. Not sure you can always turn up or turn down the dial on competency and ability and being a good leader. And Chrissy Houlahan was all of those things. Now she's Representative Houlahan, and it's really great. So it's one of these fantastic conversations, and we want you to know all these people. There are 538 representatives. Is that right?
435 in the House of Representatives, and then 100 senators. 538 is the electoral number, the electoral college number.
But isn't that tied to the representatives somehow? Isn't the 538?
It's 535.
Where's the 538 come from then?
The 538 might include DC and Puerto Rico.
Oh, yeah. So maybe there's some of those does that 435 include the representatives who can't vote, like the people from
I don't believe so.
Well, yeah, we should figure out, hey, if you're going to talk politics in nerd fashion, we should also then talk math. I mean, to really make this exciting before we launch into Chrissy Houlahan.
Math and geography.
Math, geography, and politics. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. This is why you love it. All right. So here we go. An interview from a couple of days ago. Fantastic person. And this will take us to the end. So here we go.
Congresswoman Houlahan, thanks so much for being with us. I think you're probably pretty well known in Eastern Pennsylvania, where your district is, but we've got folks all over the country who are listening in or watching along. I would love for them to get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up representing the people of the 6th Congressional District of Pennsylvania.
Sure, and thank you so much for the chance to talk with you. If you had told me 4 or 5 years ago that I would be sitting and having a conversation with you about serving in Congress, I would have laughed you out of the room. I had never intended to run for any sort of political office when I first was defeated as a 5th grader and ran for class secretary. It was my only foray into politics, my one and only until this particular opportunity. But my background is eclectic. Before joining Congress, I am the daughter of a naval officer and a Navy wife. I'm the granddaughter of a naval officer and Navy wife. I'm also the granddaughter on the other side of a Holocaust survivor. And indeed, my father is also a Holocaust survivor. The remainder of his family was killed during the Holocaust, was murdered during the Holocaust. And so that's, in a nutshell, my background as a child. As a grown-up, or as a young adult, I was able to go to college on a full scholarship, an ROTC scholarship at Stanford University. I'm an engineer. The way that the Air Force works, which is the branch that I joined, is that you get a specific scholarship in a specific field, and mine was in industrial engineering, and then you serve in that specific field. So I had the opportunity to serve up at Hanscom Air Force Base, which is up in the Boston area, and worked largely on anti-ballistic missile defense program plans. So trying to understand what sort of information we needed at what time and in what order to protect ourselves and other allies from ballistic missile attacks. And from there, I had the opportunity to go back to school to MIT, also interestingly paid for by the defense industry as well as the Air Force itself, and studied, amongst other things, how we manufacture airframes, military airframes largely, and how we can take lessons from how the Japanese manufacture those cars, as an example. Following that, my career took a really weird turn, which is what brought me to Pennsylvania. I came down to Pennsylvania with my 2 daughters, who were 3 and 1, and my husband. We ended up joining some college friends of ours who had started an entrepreneurial venture, which at the time was just a small T-shirt company. And we collectively grew that company into a global brand called And One, a basketball apparel and footwear company.
Come on, really? I've got And One stuff all over my house. That's fantastic.
You probably remember it from back in the day. And my job was the chief operating officer there. So my job was, clearly I'm not somebody who plays a lot of ball, but my passion is in making really good ideas come to life. And so my responsibility was to help grow that organization, and also importantly, grow a good organization, a company that really cared for the community and the environment and the employees. And as a consequence, sadly, of the sale of that company, where we were understandably obligated to pass that business along to the highest bid rather than somebody who cared for our corporate ethos, a number of us started another organization that has also caught fire globally and nationally. And it's a nonprofit that focuses on what's called a B corporation, or a benefit corporation in some terms. And what this is the idea that capitalism is good. Capitalism is powerful. It's 80 or 90% of our economy, depending on how we talk about it. But there ought to be ways for those of us who run and build businesses to be able to consider, if we'd like to, more than just the shareholder, but instead all of the players in the ecosystem, so all of the stakeholders. And so I helped to grow that concept, and now in 40 different states across the country, which is a lot of the states I hope that people are talking to us from. You can do that. If you'd like to incorporate your company in that way, you can. Following that, I had the opportunity through the Teach for America organization to teach chemistry in North Philadelphia. And I did that because I really wanted to take my business and engineering background into the education space, really felt that that was the crisis of our time. And my experience in the chemistry classroom was that we have a literacy problem. And so for the last 4 or 5 years before running for Congress, I helped to grow and scale a final business, a nonprofit, this one, that focuses on making it equitable for all of our children from pre-K through 4th grade to have the same reading experiences and the same reading levels, no matter whether you come from suburbs where I live or urban areas or rural areas. And so that's kind of been my trajectory. And my through line, I think, is one of service. I've really always tried to take whatever background or skills that I have and apply them in service of something.
Well, that is a fascinating background. I mean, you're one of the few people that I know who has worked sort of across the spectrum of jobs related to the way we organize businesses. I'm just kind of taking a list here. You've been in the military, which is working for the government in a particular way, for a for-profit company, started a BCorp kind of company, a nonprofit company, and now you're working in Congress. What do you know about your role in Congress that's different than all those other things? Because so many people have this difficulty trying to connect with what a congressperson does and what any elected official really does. What insights do you have for people who could see themselves knowing very well the other areas that you've worked in, and how are they similar and different to what it is that you do as a congressperson?
Those are all, really good questions. And honestly, I would probably have been one of those people 4 or 5 years ago who really didn't quite understand how the government played in all of these kinds of parts of our economy, other than the obvious ways. And so what I would say is, one of the reasons why I was compelled to run for this office is I did feel like, by doing an inventory of what I had experienced and what I had to offer, that I thought that those would be useful skills to bring to a body like the Congress. That I felt like that there wasn't enough diversity of experience in Congress, that largely most of the folks who are there are people who have worked their way up through state and local government, or people who have legal backgrounds. And I felt like our government ought to reflect the kinds of skills that the economy it's serving, has. So I think that that's one of the reasons why I ran. Now that I'm here, I really understand all the different levers that our economy and our society has. And one of the important ones is the government, the federal government, state and local governments. And they all really need to work in concert with all the other aspects of our economy, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, or otherwise, education. And so that's been kind of a really interesting experience for me to engage in how I can be useful and helpful in this new role.
Mm-hmm. So one of our friends at Vote Common Good is Congressman Dean Phillips, and from Minnesota. And Dean often talks about like the need for Congress, and in particular in government in general, to be more innovative, to find new ways to do things that the business world has already figured out, and for whatever reason, government is a bit archaic at times. I'm curious if you found that to be true, and if there's any kind of examples of things that you think, hey, it would be much more efficient, or if we were to employ this kind of innovative idea in Congress, and just maybe in how we do things, and how we were structured. Like, have you seen any of that?
Sure, and I'll give you a couple examples. One from the responsibility that Congress has to a lot of the administrative functions that we have at a federal level, whether it's the IRS or, the passport office or the VA or, you name Social Security, you name the service. Our technology is decades behind where industry is. And so we have a real issue in that there's a lot of understandable frustration with people who are interacting with those services, who are saying, why is this so broken? Well, it's really so broken because we haven't invested in the kind of technologies, and frankly, the people as well, to be able to be best in class in these areas. And so your output is as good as your input. And so what I would say is, many people push back and say, why would we spend money, as an example, in upgrading the IRS's systems? Well, because you get what you paid for. And right now it's pretty bleak. The way that we had to manage ourselves through the pandemic, people weren't able, frankly, to take their work home because of technology. And we were stuck with a huge backlog at this point in time that we need to address. The second example that I'll give you is within the Congress itself. I come from a business background, as we've talked about, but I also come from an education background. And what I'm struck by in the inefficiency of Congress is that I serve on 3 committees, 5 or 6 subcommittees based on determining based on how you count them. And at any one point in time, I can be literally required to be at 2 or 3 at the same time. And that's just not physically possible for me to be able to do that. And so a person on the outside who's maybe watching C-SPAN or any other kind of news organization would say, where are all the people who I'm paying, to be at that hearing, to be in that seat? And the reality is they're there. Wow. They're just rotating from one place to another until it's their turn to talk. And they have to be at many places at one time. Wow. This is indeed my pin that allows me into the floor to vote. It's also what I call, for the younger kids, my Hermione pin, because I feel like that I have to be constantly spinning it to be at multiple places at one time. And I bring this up because we know how to do this better in education. We know how to block schedule for anybody who's been a high schooler or taught high school. We know how to make sure that we can avoid conflicts in these kinds of things. And the Congress should be better at that. So that's a low-tech solution and a high-tech idea as well.
Well, let me ask you a question about one of those committee hearings. There was a couple weeks ago, General Mark Milley's response or his comments about critical race theory went pretty viral. And that actually happened because of you, right? People might not know that. That was, you teed him up for that. I'm curious why you wanted to use your really brief allotted time in a committee hearing to give the floor to General Milley to talk about critical race theory and to respond in the way he did.
So this is a good question, and this is a great example of what we were just talking about. I was really fortunate that in that particular hearing, and to be clear, that particular hearing, the subject was the budget of the DoD. The subject was not on anything like this theory. But the thing that I was struck by, and the opportunity that I had to be in the room for most of the hearing, was this subject kept coming up, and General Milley kept being interested in answering the question. And I find it really important as a member of Congress and my responsibility and oversight and the time that I have to ask questions and to get answers. And I felt like he had something he wanted to say, and I didn't know what it was. I don't know him very well, but I felt as though it was our responsibility, if we were going to ask a question as a body, to have an answer. And I was very pleased with the way he articulated what I think is a position that many of us has, and I'm very glad that I had the opportunity in that particular case to sit in for the whole hearing. What I would also say is consistent with what I'm also trying to do in Congress is I think civility and decency is really important. I think it's really important that we lower the temperature and that we speak to one another with respect and with dignity and with decency. I don't see that, frankly, right now in a lot of our society. And some of that actually comes from our leadership and from our representative government. And I think that's unfortunate. So wherever I am, I'm trying to use what I have, what little time that I have, both at that hearing and in this body, to really try and elevate the discussion and unify us.
Well, Representative Houlahan, you really strike me as a leader and somebody who approaches the work you do in a leadership capacity, right? Your attitude of service, your attitude of trying to make things better, and not everyone in the world sees themselves as a leader, right? It's fine. When it comes to being someone who's asking people to vote for you, that's a particular kind of leadership, I would imagine, right? As opposed to where you're hired and then you lead a group of people who you're really not feeling like you're responsible to in the way the one peculiar way that elected officials are responsible to their constituents. And even though you're somebody who's won your election and we're going to do all we can to support you to win the next one, we all know that not everyone who could vote for you chose to vote, and those who did choose to vote, they didn't all vote for you. And can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a leader and how you think about the people who didn't vote for you, for the people that are your constituents, because you've earned the right to represent your entire district, not only to represent the people who do vote for you, and how you go about thinking about that and approaching that issue?
Sure. Yeah. And backing all the way up when I gave you kind of as an introduction that I'm the daughter of a naval officer and a Navy wife. I'm also the daughter of what was, for most of my life and all of my childhood, one Democrat and one Republican.
Is that
and
so?
they would Yep. And they would go to the polls. In fact, indeed, they still do after 50 something years of marriage together. And most of those times they would cancel each other's votes out. And so that's the household that I was raised in. And then we'd have dinner and, we'd talk about the results. And indeed, I remember more than a few times my mom and my dad saying, the people have spoken, and then effectively salute smartly and carry on. That's kind of how I was raised. And so now in my purple community, mostly Democrats and Republicans, almost evenly split, and a lot of independents. I serve everybody, those people who voted for me and those people who didn't vote for me. And I know that's my job. And so I take that responsibility really, really seriously, both here in my community, which is where I'm talking to you now, and down in Washington, D.C. And so I know that there are going to be times when people don't agree with me. People who voted for me are not going to agree with me at certain times, and people who didn't vote for me are not going to agree with me at certain times. But what I do believe fundamentally is that 80% or so of the time, I really do genuinely believe that we agree with one another on basic fundamental things, like taking care of ourselves and not, having to stay up all night worrying about things like healthcare or our job or our kids' education or a safe community. I really genuinely believe that we might disagree on how we get to all of those kinds of things, but we all agree that those are the important things. And I really genuinely believe that we're all patriots and that we all love this country. And that we all love what we have built here, and we all want to value and protect it. And so that's what I carry with me when I go to Washington and out in my community.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and I've wanted to approach the world in very, very similar ways. The last 4 years freaked me out, though, and the last 6 months of this year have really spooked me. And so can you talk me off the ledge for a minute? Because it feels like I don't know that everyone wants what we all want. And I watch the levers of powers move to follow a president that did not seem to hold to any of that and was highly valued for not caring about the people who disagreed. And it feels like disagreeableness has become a feature and not a flaw. That we've all tipped over into the avenues of being disagreeable, but boy, that seems like it's something that that whole parts of our society, and I don't even think it breaks just on the particular political lines. It feels like there's Democrats, Republicans, and then this kind of anarchist, insurrectionist, MAGA crowd that I don't even know how they, where they fit on any kind of a spectrum. Should I be as spooked as I am? And I haven't even told you all the deep spooks that I feel about this. Do you feel this? I mean, obviously you were someone who was in Congress on January 6th, and you still go to a workplace that was a workplace of violence and death scene. So are we, or people like you and I and others, Rob, and the people that think about this, hey, we're kind of all in this together, and can we find the places? Are we being overly naive in light of where we are right now? Or anyway, go on.
No, hey, listen, that's why I ran for Congress. That's why I kind of did that self-inventory and said, oh my gosh, we're heading in a bad direction. And I'm very, very worried about the future of the Republican democracy. And that's why, I'm sitting here talking to you now. And so am I better now? No, I'm just as concerned, if not more concerned now than I was before. But I still have hope in the American people. I still do believe fundamentally that we are a good and passionate people. And I really do believe that we're down several different rabbit holes and we're not talking to one another. And we need to talk and communicate with one another. So we have a couple ways that we can do that, I think. One is ask questions. Don't accept things that are being fed on your feed or in your news or whatever you're watching. Question authority, figure out whether there's truth where you're looking. Help us ask questions. And so I'm a real advocate of the fact that we need to have better civics education. I think we have to have better literacy, better numeracy. A lot of those kinds of things help us be better informed citizens, and I think that's really important. The other thing that I think is missing in our society right now is this kind of a conversation, which is a calm conversation that is about substance. And I'm sad to say that this is one place where I agree with President Trump. The media doesn't do us a lot of good service in this area. We don't do ourselves a lot of good service in this area because we watch what they give us. And if we watched stuff that said, hey, listen, yesterday this morning I did a meeting with Representative Brian Fitzpatrick from Southeastern Pennsylvania. We meet all the time. I'm part of something that's called the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's 50 plus Republicans and Democrats. We meet all the time. I have all kinds of colleagues and friends who I work with bipartisanly on a lot of legislation. You would not watch that newsfeed. And so I think that that's part of our responsibility, is to do that. And the final thing that I would say is that I work very hard in Congress on bipartisanly as well, is we need an ethos of service back in this nation. Yeah. And that's not just wearing a uniform. It's City Year, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, all of the ways that we collide with one another, we don't have in the way that we used to. And in the flesh, in the spirit, and we need to have more of that so that people understand that they are part of a huge, vast, diverse country.
You just mentioned something in that list of the corps that I hadn't heard of before. Senior Corps? Is that for people that are above, 50 or 55 years old?
Yeah, I think we're missing, in many cases, a whole generation, so to speak, of people who are absolutely willing and able to use their talents that they've gained over decades in their lives to benefit us all. And so some of the ideas there is a living, existing Senior Corps, but why wouldn't we find ways to incentivize some of our seniors to participate in that and have it paid backwards to their grandchildren, as an example? And so those are kinds of ways that we should engage all of the aspects of our community in helping.
So you said there is something that is Senior Corps that currently exists?
There are. And frankly, things like I participated in AmeriCorps, a part of AmeriCorps that's called Teach for America, and I was in my mid-40s when I did that. Okay. Most people who participate in organizations like that, like Peace Corps, do that right out of college. Right. But we need to find pathways for more people to be able to leap off their career path and leap back into their career path and be able to take sideways tracks to help the community. One of the expressions you hear in the military is a force multiplier. I think that service in general is a huge force multiplier. Me spending time in a classroom in North Philadelphia not only benefits me because it helps me understand my community and my society, and helps me understand that where I sit now, 10th grade chemistry looks nothing like 12 miles away from here, 10th grade chemistry looks like. But it also helps me with all of those kids that were benefited from that, all of the different parts of their parents and that kind of thing too.
Yeah, I feel like we need to get Doug an application for the Senior Corps. Get you signed up there, Doug.
Right. Start a whole organization just to figure out how to do something just like that.
So many opportunities. Yeah. There are places where seniors can volunteer in the national park system, which is our lovely opportunities too.
Yeah. Chrissy, let me ask you this. We, so often we love to give our listeners kind of a little window into, what it's like to be a congressperson, and to help, hopefully to remind people that it's real people that serve us in Congress. And it's not just, villains or heroes on the television. These are real human beings. And I'm curious about, given your background in both business and education and military, if you found it, like, what's the difference between like when you're out campaigning and when you're serving in government? Like, is it I imagine, as a person who's campaigning for office, you have a lot of big ideas, a lot of big dreams, you make a lot of promises, and then you get to DC and the work of governing is probably much different than that. And I'm curious what you've learned about that, how you see those things differently, and give us a little peek inside what that's like.
So this is like no other organization I've ever worked in, you know, the for-profit, nonprofit sector, the military. If you can imagine, just on the House of Representatives side, 435 what amounts to independent contractors. We all have our own offices. We all run our own shops. We all have our own agendas. We all represent a different kind of community, and we all are different people. And then slice into that the leadership on both sides and all of the ways that they are motivated or not motivated to make things happen. And then you add on to that the Senate that we of course have to work with. If you remember your schoolhouse rock, that's the way it works legislatively. This is a amorphous, amoebic organization that's really, really hard to figure out how to penetrate. And the best analogy that I have, and I don't even play this sport, is it feels like rugby. It feels like that there's a ball and there's this huge scrum and everybody's doing stuff under the scrum and everybody's pushing this ball and hoping to get it somewhere, hoping to score, for their team. And the problem is that there really is only one team. There's the American team, and we need to figure out how to work with all the different people who are under there pushing and pulling and jabbing to make us all win. And that's the part that's hard. And you're right. When you campaign, I don't know about promises so much as you want to make sure that you're representing the values of your community and you want to bring those values to Washington, D.C. But you also have to realize that there are, as I mentioned, hundreds of other people who believe they're doing the very same thing. And so that's the game and the work that we have to do. And so I think that's something that I didn't understand. The other thing that I didn't understand, or that I would like to share with people, is these are human beings, and we need to recognize that this is an important job, but these are regular people, everyday people, and I think that we don't understand that in the way that we treat people who serve in this way. And if we want good people to raise their hand, then we have to treat good people well. And I don't think we are treating our elected representatives terribly well at this point in time. I frankly don't think we're treating each other very well anywhere. I heard just today that there was a restaurant that gave everybody the day off because clients were treating everybody so poorly. And so back to the civility and decency conversation, it's very important to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know how much.
One last thing that I can offer is there's also a stereotype, which I had, which is that every politician is some, outgoing, charming, charismatic people person. That actually isn't always true either. I consider myself to be a real introvert, and I would, given my druthers, I would rather be home and in bed in my pajamas watching Netflix. But it's really important work that we're doing, and a lot of us are really kind of doing everything we can to be out of body and to do what needs to be done right now.
Yeah, and look, there's also a lot of people who believe that politicians aren't just glad-handing, kind backslappers, but that they're self-seeking, soon to be well rewarded, on the verge of being criminals, kind of people, right? There's a strain of opinion about politics and about politicians, and especially about people in the House of Representatives, that people really look down on. And we try to champion. Rob and I and the organization we work with, we've traveled around the country, and we try to get faith voters to make good choices. We don't ask for candidates to be people of a particular faith or a particular ideology. We want voters to make common good, their voting criteria, and then to select candidates that would do well. And so many of them just feel like, well, there's no good choices. Throw all the bums out. Everybody's a problem. I imagine you never thought that, I'm guessing, or did you? And how is that? How does that impact the work you do? Just knowing that trope is so commonly used in our society.
I sadly understand why we think that. I can tell you now, being in the body itself, that it's not true. I can tell you that I serve with some of the most remarkable people whom I've ever had the privilege of working with, who are, very much committed to their communities and to their states and to their country. It's been just an amazing opportunity that I never thought I would have, to be exposed to some crazily talented people who are working crazily hard on all of our behalfs. And so if there's one thing that I could leave you with there, it would be that. I know I mentioned the organization that is the bipartisan sort of Noah's Ark organization, the Problem Solvers, where there's 50 or so of us who joined that. There's also an organization that I'll highlight, if it's all right with you too, that I helped to found, which is called For Country. And For Country is a group of about 20 of us at this point in time, almost evenly split Democrat and Republican. And we've all had one thing in common, which is that we've worn the uniform, we've served. And what's interesting about this particular group or caucus is that most caucuses are unified in something that they're for, right? They're about healthcare, or they're about, I don't know. I'm part of, there's a wine caucus of all things.
Really?
Yeah, there are a lot. There's all kinds of, but not to make light of it, that's an important industry, and many people who are part of the Wine Caucus, that's why they're part of it. But anyhow, I'm telling you this because the For Country Caucus is different because it has no ideological center. We are far left and far right and middle. But our purpose is to try and find what we can get along with and what we can agree on. And that's something, again, that my guess is that our listening group is not aware of, because it's not something that gets a whole lot of news or attention.
Well, I just have one last question, Rob. I don't know if you have any.
Go for it.
But are you particularly hopeful about any policy right now that's going to come forward? We know that a lot of people don't think about policy. They don't really know policy stuff. It comes in headlines. Is there something Congress is about to do that you say to yourself, now we're talking? This really, stirs up my fires of commitment to this work. Is there something coming soon that you're
So we were talking earlier about the sort of no duh agenda that, healthcare, jobs, education, that kind of thing. I think we want to be able to use the power of the people in our nation and drive our economy and drive the happiness of our communities and the happiness of our families. And that means that everybody has to be able to participate. And we have a large part of our population that is not able to participate as equally as other parts of the population. And some of those large part are women. We need to make sure that we're using 51% of our population the way that they'd like to be used, whatever that means. And we also have communities of color that have historically been on the outside looking in of many of our opportunities. And so one of the things that I'm really excited already happened was paid parental leave for federal employees. And I was helpful in getting that passed about 2 years ago. Again, for federal employees, 12 years of paid parental leave for 2.1 million employees. We are one of the last nations, developed nations, that has done that. One of two that remained. And so I'm excited that has been codified. I'm also working on doing that in other federal organizations like the State Department. But I'm mentioning this because I'm hopeful that in future legislation that we're working on, the Family Act or the Jobs Act, that this is also something that we're talking about as a nation. We need to make sure that people feel as though they can bring their whole selves to work, or frankly choose to stay home with their children as well. And we need to make sure that at life changes like a new child or a sick parent, that we have opportunities to be with our family and to do what's most important for all of us, which is to raise our family and to take care of our community. And so those are things that I'm excited about, is this energy around making sure everybody can bring their whole selves to work, whatever that means to them.
Yeah, that's great. I really wish that the Democrats would talk about themselves as a party that's about family. Because they are, right? And when you look at policies, you look at this, the COVID bill that was just passed, and now $350 is landing in people's checking accounts yesterday and today per child, because Democrats think about families. It's a family values kind of. They're not talked about that, and often aren't pitched that way. That's language that seems to be left alone to the Republicans. That doesn't feel very family oriented, or even freedom oriented for that matter. And I wish that Democrats would talk about that stuff more. I know I said it was the last question, but if I could have 10 more seconds for one more. Sure. Do you feel like there's a bit of a messaging problem in politics that doesn't match the reality of what's going on? Do you think that some of us talk about that a lot, how the communication and messaging happens? For somebody who's on the inside of it, does it feel to you like messaging is a real
Yes,
mess at times?
I am a very proud Democrat, and I am also, as you've heard from my biography, a brand builder. And I do think that as both the Democratic Party and politics in general have a problem with message, in that it's hard to encapsulate something that is something as fundamental as family values, which I believe is what Democrats stand for, in a tagline for a ball cap. It's hard to say that it depends, that policy is complicated, that our lives are complicated, that everything isn't red or white or blue. And I think that that's one of the things that I try to encourage my colleagues and myself and my team to think about, is how we talk about these issues really matters. And unfortunately, we've gotten to be a world where every word is dissected for its inner meaning, and so we just need to be plain spoken, about how what we're working for is for a better society and better communities and better families.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's going to be a messaging caucus, but boy, I hope you'd be leading it up if there was, because building a better brand is such an important part. It's not. I mean, brands they're important hooks for people in their identity, right? I mean, brands matter to us. They're not just mechanisms for sales. They're mechanisms of self-understanding and of placement in a society. And it seems like that would be really important work to do.
Very much so.
Yeah, Congresswoman Houlahan, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We've really enjoyed getting to know you better. Thank you so much for your service, not just to the people of Pennsylvania, but to the people of our entire country. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was good to be with you guys. Be well.
Thanks.